We're going to be starting chapter 5. Chapter 5 covers anti-infective drugs. We'll be talking about antibacterial medications or antibiotics, anti-tubercular medications, and then antifungal agents at the end. In our textbook, it's pages 64 to 92, so fairly long chapter. Usually I just test this one all by itself. And then ATI chapters 37 to 41, so make sure you cover those when you're studying as well. So we'll be talking about infections of various kinds, the pathogens that cause them, what's meant by the term spectrum. We'll talk about drug resistance, generations of drugs, and of course side and adverse effects of all the different kinds of antibiotics, and there's quite a few slides there that cover that you can look at yourself. So to do an overview, I'll be referring a lot to the term pathogen. Pathogen is sort of a catch-all phrase for any organism that causes infection. So if we're talking bacteria, viruses, various funguses that cause infections in human or animals, they're all considered to be pathogens. Now, among those pathogens, we've got bacteria that are living single-celled microorganisms that come in a variety of shapes and sizes and can do a lot of damage or a lot of good depending on what kind of bacteria it is. Fungi or fungi, when you look at them under the microscope, you see plant-like structures, but they don't have roots, they don't have leaves, they don't act like plants, but they can cause various infections in humans and animals, or animals that can be transmitted to humans. And then viruses. And of course, there's a lot of talk about viruses right now because we're in the middle of a viral pandemic. Viruses differ from bacteria in there that they can't really do anything by themselves. They're not living. They can only work and replicate inside the living cells of an organism. So when they're just lying there on a table, they might or might not be able to infect you if you touch it, depending on what kind of virus it is. But once they get inside your body, as soon as they hit your throat or the insides of your nose, they get into the cells and they start reproducing. And usually they'll destroy existing cells, and then more virus particles will be spilled out into the body. So we're going to be talking about a lot of drugs that we refer to as antimicrobials, and these are drugs that are going to work against various pathogens. So there'll be a number of them that we talk about in this chapter. It's going to be a long chapter and probably a lot of little bitty lectures that you get to sit and listen to. So these are just some pictures, and of course you can see them when you bring my PowerPoints up, but this is a picture of some normal bacteria in the intestine, and we are loaded with what's known as beneficial bacteria. These are natural to humans. They live in and on our bodies all over the place, and they are not harmful. In fact, most of the time they are beneficial, and they help keep other pathogens at bay. This is a picture of some bacteria in water that has not been treated, and of course these are bacteria we're not used to, and so if we drink this untreated water, these various bacteria can cause all sorts of GI tract problems and other problems as well. Here's a virus. It's a picture of an influenza virus, and you can see all the little protrusions on the outside of that virus that help it be attracted to various cells, help it stick to the cells and even enter the cells and be able to work their magic on each particular cell. This is a human papillomavirus viewed on an electron microscope, and it doesn't look all that dangerous. In fact, it's kind of pretty. But boy, it can cause you some very non-pretty problems. all sorts of warts, various cancers. Not a pretty sight when it starts working on the human body. Here are some fungus spores, and they kind of float through the air. They'll come in through your open window. They'll land on your animals. They'll land in plants. They'll land in foods. Some harmful, some not. Here is a fungus that can be harmful or helpful. Mushrooms, and there are mushrooms of all types. There are mushrooms that'll kill you in a few days, and there are mushrooms that are absolutely delicious on top of your pizza. And so anybody who doesn't know anything about mushrooms needs to leave it to the experts, which is which. And if you are a mushroom fan, they are delicious, but if you end up with the wrong one, you're in trouble. All right, so let's start talking about these medications. We are in chapter 5, so page 64 and 65 are the introductions to talking about bacteria and the various antibiotics. So there's a few terms that we have to cover. There is broad spectrum and narrow spectrum, and even without me explaining it, you can probably figure that out, what the various spectrums are. But broad spectrum antibiotics are going to work against a variety of pathogens. Narrow spectrum, of course, not quite so much. Now, anytime we're talking about antibiotics, we are going to be covering 3 major categories of adverse reactions. Everybody either has an allergy to some antibiotic or knows somebody who has an allergy to antibiotics or adverse reactions. And many antibiotics are common allergens or common drugs that cause adverse reactions in people. Most of them have natural origins, and we know that drugs that have more natural origins sometimes have a tendency to cause more problems than synthetic medications. But we will be discussing this. But notice all 3 of these adverse reactions are in red, and so that guarantees that you are going to see these throughout this chapter and on quizzes and tests. So the 3 adverse reactions, and you might as well learn them now because you're going to have to learn them later. Sensitivity reactions, and we know that a sensitivity reaction refers to an allergy. Organ toxicities, so this is damage to various parts of the body. Those can be liver, kidneys, those can be nerves in the ears, those can be nerves in the extremities, but high doses of antibiotic used over a long period of time can cause some real problems, and so that all falls under the heading of organ toxicities. And then we have superinfection, and superinfections get a lot of discussion and publicity nowadays because they're becoming more common. But 2 of the ones we're most familiar with and that we'll see a lot in healthcare is yeast. We all have yeast that lives on and in our bodies, but our normal flora, that is the beneficial bacteria that we carry with us, takes care of that yeast and makes sure that it stays under control. Too many antibiotics killing not only harmful bacteria, but beneficial bacteria many times lets that yeast spread. And then C. diff, Clostridium difficile. Every healthcare provider is familiar with that. The good bacteria is destroyed in the bowel, and then C. diff has a chance to take over, and it can eventually cause C. diff colitis, which can ultimately be fatal, but it's very common. And once you smell C. diff, you will never forget it. The book also mentions GI reactions, and that can be a common side effect: nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, stomach irritation, but that's not considered to be one of these major adverse effects. It may be unpleasant enough to require our patients to stop the drug, but they should not go without calling their MD to ask for a new antibiotic. It doesn't mean an allergy. It just means it's a side effect, an unpleasant side effect. But the 3 major adverse reactions that you are going to have to know: sensitivity reaction, organ toxicity, and superinfection.